Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler FM. I am the author of Glorybound, Tyranny of Stone, the first book of the Glorybound series, and my debut novel. It is a fast paced fantasy adventure. It's about 76,000 words long, 263 pages, whatever you prefer to measure book length in. You can pick that up on Amazon. I'll put a link to that down in the description below. But as I just said, this is my debut novel, and I thought it would be interesting to share some of the insights that I've collected through the process of writing my first book and publishing it. I'm an indie published author, so I'm working entirely alone. Uh, so I've broken this down into several categories, phases. So there's going to be concepting, drafting, refining, serializing, editing, formatting, last minute cleanup, hiring a cover artist, crowdfunding and marketing, fulfillment, and mass market. So, quite a lot to go over today. And I will give a bit of insight into my personal experience in every one of these topics. Now, this might vary depending on the author, depending on the genre they write in, depending on if they're self published or traditionally published, but this is just my experience. So, number one is concepting. So, I did most of this passively over several years because I came up with the idea for the story when I was 18 years old, working at a Dollar General. Now I'm 26, so that's about 8 years ago. And originally it was going to be a comic, but I have horrible drawing abilities. So I spent actually a year trying to learn how to draw adequately enough to make a comic. Hated drawing, actually. It's far too tedious for me. And I really just am interested in telling stories. So I wasn't interested in learning this whole separate skill for something that I could do now. So again, I got most of this done passively over a long period of time when I was bored. That's how it all started. Is I was really bored stocking shelves at a Dollar General in the middle of nowhere, and you just start cooking up a whole new world in your mind to pass the time, and you wonder what things might be like. What adventures go on there, etc., what kind of people live there, and through that time also collecting more inspirations, from mythology, from other stories, etc. So that takes it from concepting into drafting. Now I have to actually write down words on a page. And I think a lot of people get stuck here because they write a couple of chapters and they quit, or they write chapter one like 80 times and they never make it past chapter one. And I almost fell into this, actually. I rewrote chapter one several times over the course of probably 2 years when I was bouncing back and forth between whether or not it should be a book or a comic, based on my commitment to learning how to draw, and also just refining the story and what it should be. Because now, obviously, with the first book being finalized, I have the themes, I have the setting all concrete. But before, it was just a rough idea. Like, the only thing that was really concrete about it was the cosmology and the setting and some of the history. But what the story should really be about was still up in the air. So that bit went through quite a lot of change. For example, so in the start of my story, magic is a thing of the past. It doesn't exist anymore. But I remember in the first draft of chapter one ever, they used magic necklaces to communicate basically like cell phones, which I think is a stupid idea for this setting, unless you do something very high fantasy. I think it's not very good, and that's why it's a scrapped concept. But it just shows how much can change. But once I really got into it, I took off with this, and it's actually my favorite part of the writing process now. because this is where you discover the story yourself. You have your setting, you have your characters, you have, in my opinion, their destination. I think you should write a story knowing where it's going to end because it gives the whole thing direction. And now that you have all these elements, you discover the story almost. I write with this sort of balance of pantsing it and planning it. So I have general plot points I know I need to hit, places they need to go, people they need to meet, etc. But a lot of the filling in happens at the desk. I'm writing, the words are coming out. I'm like, oh, well, now this happens. Oh, well, now this happens. And it's a very exciting process for me. And it's the most joy I get. Next is refining. So now you've entirely finished your draft, unless you're me, because I actually don't entirely finish the draft before I begin refining. But in general, you should finish your draft before you refine and revise, because it stops you from spinning your wheels. It stops you from getting stuck in chapter 1, and it actually allows you to finish a work, which is the number 1 milestone that you need to hit, because it proves in your mind that you can actually complete something. But the reason that I don't wait for the end is because I serialized my book. I released weekly chapters. I got about 4 chapters ahead, and then I began serializing. So I would write 4 chapters, and then right before I released it online, I would go back through the chapter I was about to release. It wasn't perfect, but I'd brush up any awkward dialogue, I'd add any scenes, delete anything, change up the wording that didn't make sense, correct typos. Overall, it was the same, but it was just a brush up most of the time. Now, on the topic of serialization, that does bring us to this video's sponsor, you, because on the topic of serialization, I am currently writing book 2, and in the coming week or two, book 2 of Glorybound will be serialized over on my Patreon, which you can also find at the link in the description below. There you will also be able to find early drafts of chapter 1, or of book 1 rather, that were serialized last year, as well as the ebook for Tyranny of Stone, which will be free, or rather included with a membership of the Hero of Centrum or the Magnate Lord tiers, or available for €5 for anybody. So again, with the serialization, the paid tiers will get chapters 4 weeks or 2 weeks depending on the tier ahead of the free members over on Patreon, but eventually all members of my Patreon will get to read the early drafts ahead of the book's release. So that takes me to the next topic of serializing the book. This is entirely optional. Originally, I did it for 2 purposes. One is trying to build an audience, because I was writing in the void, basically. I'm thinking, I want to sell this book, but I have nobody to sell it to. Nobody knows that it exists. Nobody knows that I exist, so I need to change that. And I thought one way was to go online. There's a website, Royal Road, you've probably heard of it, and post chapters online there for free. And so that's what I did. And it worked okay. Royal Road specifically their algorithms encourage more of a rapid release. So 3 to 5 chapters per week, each 2,000 to 3,000 words in length. That's a pace I unfortunately don't have the ability to keep up with. I am very busy outside of writing. So I write about 1 chapter every week. If I'm lucky, I can write 2. But consistently writing 3 to 5, not going to happen. And the second reason that I wanted to serialize was for my own motivation. Because even if just one other person was out there reading my book, it motivated me to make sure I kept writing, to make sure I kept showing up every week, posting 1 chapter, and then 1 chapter, and then 1 chapter. And, 26 weeks later, I've got a book written. So now that the entire book is written and serialized, we're on to the editing phase. And this one was difficult for other reasons. Um, it's difficult because you have to make sure you find a good editor. I think I was very fortunate because during my time posting online, both through Royal Road and on Twitter, or X, where I was posting primarily at this time, I met a community of very good writers, a very good community, and through them I found my editor, and I'm very happy with her work. She was extremely helpful, and I think definitely did more work than I was expecting for how much she was charging for. I was asking questions after the fact in the email, like, well, what about this? What about that? And she was very kind and patient with me the whole time, so greatly appreciated it there. And once you have the editor, you have to wait a period of time for the manuscript. So during that time, I was actually writing a tie-in story that runs parallel to the main book. You can also find that over on my Patreon or by signing up to the email list at gloryboundstory.com. And once I got that done, then my manuscript was finished for the book, and I was able to go through and basically rewrite the whole thing. Not from scratch, but there was a lot of changes that needed to be made. Primarily for me, the first, I think, 3 or 4 chapters needed the most work, where it was about pacing and plot introduction. There simply wasn't enough to hook readers early on in the story, so that was a big thing I had to change. Additionally, there was a bit with Kalan, the main character's motivations, that didn't quite add up early on, so I needed to add several more scenes in chapter 3 that got added. And then there's a character that dies in the early drafts. If anyone watching this has read the early drafts, you know, because only one character, one protagonist character died in book 1 early drafts, and now they're still alive for now. I just felt that that wasn't an editing thing, that was a personal preference. I felt like I had killed them off unfairly, so I brought them back to live another day. So I wrote that in an entirely separate document from scratch, because I think that allowed me to refine the prose a bit better, make things simpler, sharper, punchier, and overall it helps you catch more mistakes, because the editing process that I'd underwent wasn't more of like a proofreading. It wasn't there to fix typos, although she did point out typos when they arose. But it was more of a storytelling edit on character development, character interaction, plot, overall, like, will this hook reader engagement, etc., etc. So the process of writing in a separate document actually helped make the book a more enjoyable reading experience, I believe. Then from there, it went on to formatting, which was the worst part, I think. I was not a big fan of formatting. I drove myself crazy working in several different pieces of software because I'm cheap and I didn't want to pay for software, and trying to figure out KDP's dimensions and all these different rules with margins and getting things to stick correctly on the page and adding proper gutters, and then that would mess up the page count, and then my chapters weren't starting on the right pages anymore, and my page counts were all messed up, and anytime I tweaked one little thing, it was like rapidly changing my page count. This is when I learned that page count is actually a terrible metric of how long your book is, because I've had a lot of people ask, people I know personally that know I'm writing a book or was writing a book, how long is it? How long is it? Okay, well, it's 263 pages long, but depending on how I formatted it, it was anywhere from like 250 pages to like 600 pages. The amount of things you could tweak, if you want to write a long book, you can play with format and you can have a book be as long as you want by a page count metric. So I realized that that is entirely useless, just so you know. It probably didn't help that at the same time I was trying to format the book, I was on like a hard deadline because I had in 2 days, while I was formatting, I had to leave for a business trip for 3 weeks. So I wasn't going to be able to format the book and get proof copies ordered while I was away, which really drove me crazy. Part of that, like, it wasn't life or death if it got delayed for 3 weeks, but in my mind, I call myself an author and I have this finished manuscript. It needs to get out. People need to read it. So it was like a personal driving me crazy. I knew I wasn't going to be able to focus for 3 weeks. It'd always be in my mind, like burning in. And so that takes me then to the last minute cleanup, because after ordering the proof copies and going through it, it turns out I still had work to do, even in formatting, because my font did not match the font of the page count, and on the very last page of the book, not even in the story, in like a glossary of in-universe terms, at the back of the book, on the very last page, there was an unnecessary page break halfway through the page, and it just split it in two. And I don't know if I've ever been so mad over a silly mistake like that. I don't know how that happened, but it happened. At least it was a proof copy. And then I also found several more typos, which really crushed me, because finding typos in what you believe to be a finished manuscript is a horrible feeling. Like, there's a certain paranoia of, I think that there's, in this book, there's still a typo hiding somewhere from me. I've read this book I don't know how many times. But the most heartbreaking fact is that there's probably still a typo in here somewhere that I just didn't catch. So, if you read Glorybound and you catch a typo, please let me know and I will fix it. So on to the next stage. There's hiring a cover artist. Now this is a bit out of place because I didn't know where to place it. I personally hired a cover artist while I was serializing and while I was writing the first draft. I hired a cover artist so early, specifically because I was serializing and I needed marketing material for it. I was just writing with some ugly looking AI generated cover, and it just looked bad and it made me look bad and I didn't like it. So I forked up the cash to get a cover ASAP. Now I wouldn't recommend this unless you are also serializing. If you're going to wait for a finalized book, hold off, because you don't know how long it's going to take to finish it. I would say wait until you get an edited manuscript, probably, because if you write a whole draft and you polish it up and you're ready to send it to an editor, maybe it's really bad and you have to rewrite the whole thing, which happens even for authors that are like several books deep into their career. It can still happen that you write a stinker and the editor's like, you gotta start over. So if you fork up a few $100 to have a cover, and then you have to go back and spend more months rewriting the book, it seems a little premature. Then you're still going to use the cover, so it doesn't really matter one way or another. Like, it's not money wasted. So you can really do this whenever you want. Just make sure you do it before you need it, I guess. Otherwise, you're going to be waiting on it, because art can take quite a long time. My cover artist is very efficient and was very diligent with keeping me updated every week on the progress, but even then it took, I think, a couple months. And I know it can take longer than that. So then on to the crowdfunding and marketing phase. This part was very exciting, but also quite stressful, because at last, the book that I had spent at this point a year of my life on, working very hard, was finally going to get some attention, and people were finally going to get it into their hands. And of course, there's a worry that no one's going to show up. You worry that, I worked so hard and I'll have nothing to show for it. Luckily, this was not the case. My crowdfunding campaign was actually very successful. I made a profit, and I'm very grateful to everyone who pre-ordered a copy of my book, because no amount of effort from me was going to make people show up to support the project and want to read the stories. So it's still crazy in my mind, even though the campaign's been over for a few weeks now. I can't believe that on my first book as a nobody author, I actually managed to not just break even, but make a small profit in my first month of having a book for sale. So yeah, that's absolutely amazing. But it was a lot of work, I started posting here more to draw attention to the campaign. I started posting on TikTok. I started advertising more on X, everywhere I possibly could. Marketing was key, and it paid off in the end, because I got more eyeballs on the project and more people were interested in the story, and they showed up to take a chance on my book as a debut author and support me. So thank you again for everybody. It's a crazy rabbit hole, and there's a ton of business side of things and math that goes into this. And I'm also extremely grateful to Brian Niemeyer. He has been an incredible mentor on the business side of writing, because it's like the creative part. Okay, I get that, but running things as a business is a whole different ballgame. And without his help, I don't think it would have been possible. He's got a ton of books out as well. They're quite enjoyable. I'm reading one of them right now. So yeah, I definitely recommend going to check out his work as well. So now on to where I'm at, where I'm closing up now with fulfillment of this campaign. So this is probably the second most stressful part of the process. And technically I'm still in this now because I have a couple last minute items I need to ship out. But fulfillment was actually not as bad as I was expecting. I was really worried, especially living here in Europe, that sending signed copies back to the United States would be exorbitantly expensive and that I would have messed up shipping calculations. Luckily, it wasn't that horrible, but it was still a bit stressful. But everything turned out okay so far. Not everyone's received their book yet. I actually don't think anyone has received their signed book yet. But most of the people that bought non-signed copies have already gotten their books delivered. And it's just fingers crossed that everyone's signed books get there okay. Otherwise, I'm going to have to redo the orders, and then it will start getting expensive. And then finally, I guess where we're transitioning into now is mass market. So, book 1 is available on Amazon. Again, you can check it out at the link in the description below. Now I guess it's kind of trying to get reviews, get the word for the book out there. I'm going around to some book reviewers here on YouTube, over on TikTok, trying to get some book reviews in to get some more eyeballs on it. And in the meantime, I'm hard at work on book 2. I've already written 6 chapters. So yeah, subscribe to this channel for more updates of my author journey and posting some lore. For Glorybound, check out the book. Book 2 is getting serialized on Patreon, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a nice day.